Good morning, girls. So today our lesson is on muscular tissues. By the end of this lesson you are going to know what the different types of tissue are. You're going to be able to identify the role of muscular tissue, and then you're also going to be able to identify explain the importance of muscular tissues. So to start off with, please can we go through the memory platform. You've got 4 questions on here. Answer them. Once you've answered them, then flick on to the next slide. There are 3 different types of muscular tissue that we will be looking at. So the first one is a striated muscle. You may hear a striated muscle referred to as a voluntary muscle. That's because it's a muscle that we need to tell our brains to move. So an example could be our bicep. The second type of muscle that we're going to be looking at is a non-striated muscle. You may also hear this being referred to as an involuntary muscle. That's because these muscles work without us even thinking about it. So things like our organs they function with the use of non-striated muscles because they are working without us having to tell our body to do so. The third and final type of muscle is a cardiac muscle. Now, our cardiac muscle is found in our heart. We know that because cardiac means heart, and you will hear that being referred to quite a lot throughout this unit. So you may hear cardio, you may hear cardiac. Whenever you hear those terms, always know that that means the heart. There's a couple of key words I want you to know so that it makes it easier for you guys to access the lesson. The first one is the central nervous system. Now this runs all the way from the brain down the spinal cords, and it delivers nerve signals to receptors. These receptors are found all over our body. The next one is the automatic nervous system. You may also see this throughout my PowerPoints referred to as the NAS. Now this is part of the NAS and it's responsible for controlling internal organs. As it states in its name, it's automatic, which means it just flickers, it just reacts, and it sends signals without us even telling ourselves to. I'm just going to go back to the central nervous system for a second. Our central nervous system works with us telling it to. So if I decided that I wanted to flex my bicep, my central nervous system would receive signals from the brain that would then tell my bicep to do that, whereas the automatic nervous system just works involuntary on its own. The next one is an antagonistic muscle. Now this is either one or a sheet of muscle that contracts while the opposite muscle relaxes. So again, I'm going to use the example of a bicep and a tricep. As my bicep contracts, my arm is bent, which means that my tricep is relaxed. If I then straighten my arm out, my tricep is contracting and my bicep is relaxing. Sorry, I didn't say that very well. So by that movement, we can see that the muscles are working in pairs together to allow the movement of my arm to straighten and to bend to occur. The first thing that I want us to know is that our striated muscle is found when it's attached to bone. So 9 times out of 10, but there are a couple of muscles on your face that are attached to skin. But normally you'll find your striated muscle attached to bone. If you are a meat eater, this is very, very similar to the meat that you eat. So let's say you've got a chicken. That texture, sometimes you find it like I don't want to say stringy because I don't want to insinuate that you guys are eating stringy chicken. But if you pulled open a cooked chicken breast and you'd find it had almost like little strips running through it, that's the same as what striated muscle is, and we're going to go through those stripes or strips in a little bit more detail on the next slide. As I've already stated, the muscles contract from nerve impulses that are sent from our central nervous system. We tell our muscles that we want, we tell our muscles that we want them to work, and our central nervous system sends a little signal to our muscles so that can happen. As I've already stated, in terms of it being similar to meat, these are composed of fibres, and these create like bands of muscles. These bands of muscles are how we see the meat or the texture of the muscle being quite stringy. Each one of these cells that creates the bands of fibre is cylindrical in shape, and they are multinucleated. So as we've already come across those terms before, multinucleated and in our memory platform just means that there are multiple nucleuses for each cell. Our muscles contain lots and lots of mitochondria, and this is because if we can remember back to the lesson that we did, I think 5 weeks ago, mitochondria are responsible for the production of energy within our cells. So our muscles have lots and lots of mitochondria so that ATP can occur, which is a type of energy source within our bodies, and it allows our muscles to contract frequently. When we are talking about striated muscle, this is skeletal muscle. So this is your hamstring, your quadriceps, your pectorals, your biceps, your triceps. These are the muscles that we use every day to make ourselves move. And finally, one last thing, our striated muscles, you may also hear them being referred to as skeletal striped muscle or voluntary muscle. For this exam, you are most likely to hear them called striated muscle, but if you guys are doing extra research, extra revision outside of these lessons, please be aware that you may see it referred to as one of these. Before we move on, I just wanted us to go into a little more detail about what a striated muscle is kind of built from and what it looks like. So if we look at this zoomed in picture of a striated muscle, the first thing that I want us to point out is the nuclei. So we can see that there are several different nucleuses in each cell structure. Within that, we can see that we have lots of, I'm going to use the highlighter instead, we can see that we've got lots of cylindrical muscle fibres. So by that, I mean these muscle fibres that are going in stripes in this direction, I've just highlighted them. So we can see that we've got lots and lots of those stripes. Within that creates lots and lots of stripes or striations, which is why this type of muscle is called a striated muscle. So with that, we've got lots and lots of stripes that are sat next to each other. They then lay on top of each other parallel to one another to create our muscles. So I know that might sound a little bit weird, but I'm going to show you a picture now. I hope it doesn't come up highlighted. It is coming up highlighted, but we can work with that. If I show you this image, and you can see that you've got lots of these lines. These are examples of the muscles being in stripes. So when you see this texture, when you see this image of a muscle, this is a striated muscle. And hopefully seeing this makes it a little bit more sense in terms of how the muscles build themselves in layers. If I think back to science, and when we've done this, studied muscles in science, I know that you would have seen an image that's similar to this. So the striated muscle is just built up of all of these tiny little stripes and fibres that sit on top of each other, one another. Let's move on to the next type of muscle. Non-striated muscle is built up slightly differently to striated muscle. It's not banded, so you don't have the bands of fibres that sit one on top of another and sit parallel to each other. And these cells have a single nucleus. The cells dovetail with each other, which creates more of a sheet-like structure rather than strands of muscle. And this receives signals through the automatic nervous system. So we can find this in the organs or in the eyes, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about that in a second. But before I do that, I just want to show you this image of a non-striated muscle. If we look here, we can see that we've got this, I don't know what to call it, I guess we'll say dovetail because that's what I've referred to it as here. But we've got this shape where it flicks, it goes up and it goes down. It goes up and then it goes down. That's what dovetailing is. So whereas with our striated muscle we had stripes of muscle like this that created fibres that sat parallel to each other, our non-striated muscles have this dovetail effect, so that it's almost like the cells are mosaicing on top of each other. So the actual structure of the muscle itself is different. A key term I got you to get down was an antagonistic muscle. Now, an example of how non-striated muscles work is looking at how they work as antagonistic pairs. We can find an example of this would be like in the esophagus or within our digestive system. So we have a sheet of muscle that's wrapped in a circular motion or a circular fashion at the top of this tube here. So this is a sheet of muscle, and this sheet of muscle here and here, and it would work the whole way down, so there would be another sheet here and another sheet here. These sheets of muscle are wrapped in a circular fashion. They then work with another type of muscle. What colour should we go for? I want it to stand out. We'll use blue. They work with another type of muscle that's wrapped in a long fashion down the shaft of the tube. So here I've got two different types of muscle. I've got one here that runs the whole way down the tube in a straight line, and then I've got another one that wraps itself in a circular motion here. As the circular muscle contracts, it forces the food, this yellow image here, it forces the food down, and the muscles that are running straight down relax. As the muscle that wraps itself around relaxes, the long muscle contracts, and that forces the food down. If we take a look at the second image here, we can see how that's coming into action there. As one muscle contracts, the other one relaxes, and that forces the food to go down. So this whole process is called peristalsis, and that is when you get the digestive system or one of the food tubes contracts and relaxes, and it forces the food to go down. The second example of an antagonistic pair of non-striated muscles that I want us to know about are the muscles in the eyes. Now, I don't want us to get bogged down by the actual terminology here. I just want you to think about the two different types of muscles that are working. So firstly, we've got this type of muscle that's working in like a wheel. So we've got the muscle that's going out, it's going left, right, up and down, okay? We've then got a second type of muscle that works here, and this is responsible for the rotation of the eyes, okay? So we've got two different types of muscle, one muscle that allows the eye to rotate, and one type of muscle that allows the eyes to look up, down, left and right. Now with this, these involuntarily allow the eye to, or allow the pupil to dilate so that it can either let in more light or less light depending on how it's needed. So these two muscles will work together. As one contracts, the other one will relax, and that allows the pupil to just work its magic and let light in as it sees fit. The final type of muscle that we're going to be looking at is the cardiac muscle. Now this is nice and simple. There are 4 chambers in the heart, and in those 4 chambers you will find cardiac muscle. That's the only place on the body where you will find this type of muscle. Myocardial muscle is really, really special because it works rhythmically without receiving any stimulation. So this type of muscle, myocardial muscle, just works in a little beat like budum, 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 budum. And we know that because we can think about how our heart beats. There are some striations in this muscle, and there are also little discs, but we're going to move on to that and look at that in a little bit more detail next. As we've stated on the previous slide, this type of muscle still has a few striations in it. It has one nucleus, and that's a central nucleus, so it sits in the middle of the cell. There is like a branching network, so that means that we can see that the structure kind of interlaces with each other into branches. So I can connect this all the way up because it creates, like I've already said, a branch-like system. And we can see that we've got intercalated discs. Now an intercalated disc is a space that's found in between the cells, and these are here because they allow for the cardiac cells to transmit pulses. So earlier on, like we said, that the myocardial muscle works on its own to create that rhythmic beat. These intercalated discs create the space so that that almost beat, bum, ba-dum, 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 can just keep working. It is important to recognise here that the ANS controls the rate of contraction. So it doesn't necessarily tell the muscle to contract, because cardiac muscles are special because they do that on their own, but it controls the rate of contraction. Now this is important because your atria, which are your top two chambers of your heart, and your ventricles contract at slightly different times. So the ANS just makes sure that they work at the right rate in comparison to each other. It also helps, or the AMP also helps, to ensure that the flow of blood is adapted depending on the different circumstances. So when you are at rest and when you are at exercise, your blood in your heart will pump at different times and different speeds depending on how much oxygen you need to get to your working muscles and around your body. Here I have my quadriceps, so those are the muscles that run down the fronts of your legs. Which type of muscle is going to be found here? I'll give yourself 5 seconds and then move on to the next slide. The correct answer is striated muscles. Now we know this for a number of different reasons. The first one, a striated muscle is something that we have to physically tell our brains to do. So if I think about, oh, I want to straighten my leg, my brain has to tell my muscle, straighten your leg. We can also, the second reason that we know it's striated is because we can see these lines, these striations that run through the muscle. So next one. Which type of muscle is most likely to be found here? This is within an artery wall. 5 seconds. So this is most likely to be a non-striated muscle. We know this because it will just work involuntarily on its own. The contractions will happen here after signals being sent through the automatic nervous system. We're now going to be moving on to another type of muscle, which is the nervous muscle tissues. There's 2 words that we will need to know so that we can access this understanding or this knowledge easier. And the first one is homeostasis. Now this is the process of maintaining a constant internal environment despite the outside changing. So an example of this could be temperature. Whilst we are exercising, our body releases heat as a byproduct. So our thermoregulatory system needs to maintain our body's temperature. The maintenance of our temperature is homeostasis. Another example could be you've put loads of salt and vinegar on your chips. I love chips with vinegar, only chip shop chips though. You've got loads of vinegar on them. We know that vinegar is very, very high in acid. So when we eat that acid, our body needs to naturally balance the pH balance so that we're not excessively acidic within our bodies. That process of maintaining that pH balance is homeostasis. The second key word that I want us to go over is myelin, and this is the protective protein or coating that's normally built up of a phospholipid, and it's wrapped around the nerve fibres. And this does 2 things. Firstly, it protects them, and secondly, it increases the speed of the nerve conduction. I'm going to keep this nice and short and sweet and simple. So nervous tissues, as I'm sure you can imagine, are found in the brain. They are found on spinal cords, nerves and receptors. These receive a stimulus from either an internal or an external factor, and they aim to maintain homeostasis. When I'm referring to an internal or an external factor, this could be something that happens inside my body, or it could be something that happens on the outside of my body. And then third and finally, a stimuli is interpreted from something that we do. So I'll sense, I'll smell, I'll sight, I'll touch, or I'll taste, or I'll sound. Let's say somebody tickles me. I feel myself being tickled, so I've been touched, and then like, oh, I don't want that to happen, so I scratch where I've just been tickled, or let's say an insect landed on you, that's probably a better explanation. Insect landed on me, I scratch myself. That is me responding to the stimuli of touch. I don't just go, oh, I've been touched, and my automatic reaction is for me to scratch myself. My brain has to tell my muscles in order for me to do that. When my brain tells my muscles, it's my nervous tissues that are allowing for that signal to be sent. So far we've looked at the way that these tissues are built up, so now we're going to look at how a nervous tissue is composed, or what it's composed of rather. So the first thing is a neuron. Now this transmits the nervous pulse. So the neuron is what receives the pulsing from either the central nervous system or from the automatic nervous system. Now you will only find these neurons in the brain, in the spinal cord, and in the receptors that are receiving those transmissions. The second thing that the nervous tissue is composed of is neuroglia. You may hear this being referred to as glia or glia cells. And this is a connective tissue that's intertwined with neurons within the brain. Your neuroglia also offers support and protection. It's like myelin, and again it helps to maintain homeostasis. I just want us to spend a little bit of time looking at this structure as a tissue. So we can see we've got the nucleus, and that is within the myelin sheath. So the first thing that I want us to point out are these tiny, tiny little dots. These are your single nucleuses within each cell. You can see there's like a light orange haze sitting around the axon, and that's the long part of the tissue. That long part is what connects onto the central nervous system or onto the receptor. So the orangey haze kind of wraps itself around that, and that is single cells that are part of or that create the myelin sheath. So as we've already said, the myelin sheath is what protects the central nervous system. It protects the tissues, and it allows for the impulses to take place, and it protects them. So we've got that myelin sheath, and then we've also got the nucleus, and that sits inside the cell body. Okay, so we've got the nucleus there, and then the cell body. We have now covered all different types of tissues. So we have covered our epithelial tissues, our connective tissues, our muscular tissues, and our nervous tissues. If you head over onto the Microsoft form now, you will be able to answer and go through some questions based on all of those different tissues. They will predominantly be based around the muscular system, or the muscular tissues and the nervous tissues, but I do want to get your brains buzzing about the stuff that we have already covered so we don't forget it. Thank you very much for going through this, guys, and head over onto the Microsoft form.